Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to the OGPGH conference. Thank you so much for hopping into my chat today. My name is Alexandra Parisi, and I'll be talking to you about the importance of identifying crown jewels for HoneyTokens. So just a little bit about my background. I'm pursuing my master's degree at the Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon University in Information Security, Policy, and Management. I'll be graduating this May. Let's get it going. I'm excited. So my background is in international relations, international security studies at Duquesne University, where I pursued my bachelor's degree. So while I really love my undergraduate degree work, of course, I found cybersecurity through that. And I really like cybersecurity and international relations because I can bring both sectors of knowledge together. And I find that in threat intelligence, which is really where I'd like to focus in cybersecurity. I found that both understandings together kind of bridge the gap between international affairs and the technical side of cybersecurity, and it morphs together to understand how the world works and the different threats. And I find that pretty exciting. So with that, I find my other interest in APT groups and that whole side of research. And then of course, my other interest that's seeing on the screen is learning OSINT tools and kind of the nitty gritty through that. So a little bit on what led me to today's topic is my work history. This summer, I worked remotely for a Fortune 200 company as a threat intelligence intern for a cybersecurity and assurance division. I learned about the importance of crown jewels and how those are essential to organizations, especially global companies. And then through that, I learned about the concept of HoneyTokens and how those come into play with crown jewels. Currently, I'm a threat analysis graduate research assistant at the Software Engineering Institute. I've been there for about 2 years now, aside from my summer work. I learned about ransomware threats and worked on a collaborative publication with that. And now I'm currently working on a threat report research assignment. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So what exactly is a HoneyToken? What am I talking to you about? A HoneyToken is essentially everything a honeypot is, but it's not a computer system. So digital lures or digital tripwires that are distributed on a network with the intent to primarily catch insider threat. However, the overall intent is just to catch suspicious activity or anything unusual on a network. So for example, a set of AWS client or secret keys are dropped in a configuration file that only trusted and specified staff should be allowed to access. So once it's used or accessed, the HoneyToken is then tripped over, and then whoever dropped that HoneyToken is triggered and alerted, whether that's phone, email, whatever the system has it set up as, and then it's up to that person to decide the next steps. So what's important to note here is that these tokens are meant to be left alone. They're not set up like, all right, let's get these bad boys triggered. No, they're meant to be left alone on your network. If they're triggered, then something isn't right. Aside from the possibility of false positives, these are just, you don't want to touch them. You really want to hope that no one is touching them, because then if so, then there's likely a problem. Someone's snooping on your network. So what is a HoneyToken really? This is a non-exhaustive list, but this is just some of the many I have discovered. And I'm not going to read them all to you, but some of them could be macro Excel or Word files, documents, Google Docs, AWS API keys, QR code. That's a new one that I discovered. It's becoming more and more popular with like bigger production companies, which I think is just really incredible. Cloned sites, DNS, you can see all the rest. There's definitely a lot of possibilities, and there's way more than this. These are just some of the ones I found are pretty popular. So this summer, a tool that I personally had experience with and I learned more about each day is a tool called Thanks Canary, and they're known as Canary Tokens. So Canary Tokens are hardware, virtual, or cloud-based birds that are configured and deployed throughout the network. So once these tokens are dropped and triggered, an alert is then sent to whoever's in charge of the token as an email or phone notification of activity. So when the canary is then triggered, you can check logs, and anytime, like in my experience, I would check Splunk logs, but that's not like the be all end all. However you want to monitor the activity is all based on you and your company, but I found that Splunk logs were definitely the quickest way to do it. And then you choose your course of action. So other tools I've discovered in my research are Thanks Canary, Open Canary, which is essentially a more open source version of Thanks Canary, which I found on GitHub, Pansift, Decept, Stealth Defend, and HoneyGen. This is a non-exhaustive list, so if anyone has other tools they're curious that they might have found online, or just tools in their experience, I would love to talk about it and learn more about it, so please let me know. So now on to crown jewels. What is a crown jewel and why are they such a big deal? So crown jewels are mission critical information assets that are used to compete and succeed in a global marketplace. These crown jewels can represent more than 80% of an organization's total value. So that includes both tangible and intangible assets. So whatever would cause a major business impact, if they were compromised, that's likely considered your crown jewel. So these can include valuable data, trade secrets, intellectual property, source code and algorithms, IT systems and applications, novel processes, new product designs, formulas, changes and updates to existing products or systems, research and development, things like that, you name it, that sounds similar to this, likely a crown jewel, but can change, of course, a little bit depending on what your organization does or produces. But overall, depending on how you look at this list or what is essential to your organization, crown jewels are where an organization or company draws all of its power in the marketplace and whatever is essential to accomplish the organization's mission. So that's really where you should focus on what defining your crown jewels can be, is look at the mission. Speaking of, so define your crown jewels. Are there any agreements or policies within your organization or company on what defines your crown jewels? It can be either spelled out right in a policy, which I'm finding is a bit more common, or it's like hearsay among your threat intel team, something like that. I think that having a policy set in stone that works with updating your mission, that is probably smarter, because as you update your mission or your needs of your threat intel team, something like that, you should be updating your crown jewel policy. So if you do have a crown jewel policy, where is it located and what are the costs of it? You know, what, according to the policy, defines your crown jewels? Is that spelled out? Because it should be. And are these, how often are these updated? You know, are these updated every 5 years? How often is your mission updated? Is it just hearsay? I mean, all different possibilities should be factored into this policy. And now this one makes my blood boil because it is so important. Who has access to what? And that might sound like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised statistically how often this is overlooked. You know, what applications, what users, who can access what, and does this access make sense? If I'm an intern and I have access to my CISO's files, why? Were you even aware that I have access to these files? Probably not, but say I'm some sneaky little brown noser with a hidden agenda, I'm probably not going to tell you that I can access the C-suite's files. I'm just saying. And say, you know, you have some analyst that's pretty curious about what's going on in our business partnership with X country, I might snoop around those files and maybe get our financial documents from our partnership, you know? So different things like that, or maybe you might not even realize the access that I have. So this is really important to constantly check up on. But also not locking up that access right away could be smart due to the fact that you might want to drop a honey token here and see how often it's triggered. So that's something to consider. And then these other questions, you know, who are the owners and what processes rely on them? So these questions such as these need to be asked and addressed in identifying your crown jewels in order to protect and secure your organization. So an example of how an organization can work to identify their crown jewels is something like MITRE's crown jewel analysis. I'm not saying this is the be all end all, but for me, this is definitely something I looked at in a first step process for an organization that is kind of unsure of their crown jewels or definitely needs a revamping. So MITRE's CJA is a methodology that's proven to help large and complex enterprises understand what's most critical. So you start from a system development all the way through the system deployment. And so this framework provides a foundation for other MITRE processes that I'm just not going to go into, but it's used to help assist in identifying crown jewels for other organizations. And it's assisting and identifying the associated threats and risks, especially if you're trying to set up a threat landscape. So once your crown jewels have been identified, you then must understand the threats to your critical data. If your data has been compromised, this probably is not a random event. It could be, but it most likely isn't. This most likely happened with relatively low effort, and there's a possibility that the real threat to your organization is right at home. Oftentimes, these HoneyTokens, through the crown jewels, catch insider threat, and it's more often than not. If your security is inadequate, a data breach and siphoning could go unnoticed for months, which is why it's pretty important to stay up on your logs and keep a clear line of communication with people on your team. Does your threat intelligence team work hand in hand with the SOC, building off the point I just made? So while the SOC shouldn't notify you of every little thing that goes wrong immediately, of course, they have to do their job appropriately. Having a clear line of communication with people on your team, the different analysts, or perhaps even interns trying to learn of what's going on and how to learn from all that data that they're collecting. That is definitely something essential, especially if you're trying to revamp your crown jewels or trying to learn from different HoneyTokens you might have dropped. There needs to be a clear line of communication between the two. So when you have this, you can then revamp your threat landscape. You can lay out a threat landscape if you don't have one. If you're learning from previous incidents or learning from previous threats, this is essential in communicating with one another. You can't have a cohesive cybersecurity team if you're not talking. Something to think about. So these elements can all be pieced together, and they work as the glue in securing your crown jewels or discovering what the heck's going on your network. So I found these statistics from Statista, sorry about that. English is hard, to show the annual number of data breaches and exposed records in the United States from 2005 all the way to the first half of 2020. So in 2019, the US faced 1,473 data breaches with over 164.68 million sensitive records exposed. In the first half of 2020, there were 540 reported data breaches, and I'm very curious to see how that number shifts by the end of the year and the number of exposed records that are reported. In 2018, where figures peaked, you can see right here, if you can see my mouse, there were nearly 471 million records exposed, with the data breaches amounted to 1,257. And that year, it was primarily the business sector, so it was a lot of data theft. And then usually the financial sector is targeted after that. So reading these statistics, the article mentioned that data breaches could be classified as unauthorized party, just accessing protected files and or accounts, which of course sounds like a no-brainer, right? But a huge reason why identifying your crown jewels is so important is that definition exactly. So when an organization takes time to figure out these critical assets, it shows where you're most vulnerable and where security may be loose in these data files, or even where the organization may be turning a blind eye. Like you could think that not paying attention to some random file on a very small part of your team, it's not that important, but who knows, there could be the most data siphoning happening through that file and getting into a network otherwise. So it could make your team susceptible to breaches. So then I took a look at the Verizon 2019 data breach investigations report, which conducted analysis of 41,686 security incidents, of which 2,013 were confirmed data breaches. The cat wants to learn about this too. So with these incidents and breaches show different types of involvement, such as public sector entities, healthcare organizations, financial industries, small businesses, outsiders, and insider threats, business partners, organized crimes, organized criminal groups, and the identified nation states or affiliate actors. And these are all due to vulnerable systems and poor cyber hygiene that these incidents or events happened. So, and often more than not, the crown jewels of the organization were impacted. So a statistic that I definitely wanted to point out that I found pretty alarming, but also not surprising, because this is a common theme I'm finding, or that executive staff were compromised in 20% of the incidents, and they're 6 times more likely to be a target asset that is compromised in professional service breaches than in the media industry, according to Verizon. So these hackers are sitting here and they're thinking like, why the heck would I jump through all these hoops at the bottom levels of the company when I could just go to the head honcho up top and just knock on his door and say, give me the cash, because clearly you don't care about your security. Your security sucks, so you're just going to give it to me, or I'll put up a slight bit of a fight, but you don't care, so why should I care? These hackers clearly see that you don't care about your security. So if your C-suite's sitting there being compromised like it's no one's business, they're just going to go for it, you know? And you know what? A lot of the times it's probably going to work. And that's where it should be concerning for you. That's where these HoneyTokens will work, because something is wrong in your cyber hygiene. And these tokens need to be dropped here to figure out what is going wrong. And a lot of the times it's social engineering, which is so mind-boggling. But, you know, it happens. And it's usually phishing, but we're not going to dwell on that at the moment. So similar to honeypots, HoneyTokens were based on what they're built for. So after you identify your crown jewels and your vulnerabilities from learning about prior attacks or failures, what's the common intention of the attacker? And do you notice any trends building on that threat landscape? So an interesting mechanism for tokens that I actually read about pretty recently was for national security purposes. I never thought about it this way. I guess it looked from more of an industry perspective. But the director of Institute for Security Technology Studies at Dartmouth University did a little bit of research on HoneyTokens, and he pitched that the Defense Department could use HoneyTokens to snare people searching for unauthorized information on weapon systems, especially nuclear weapons, which I found to be pretty interesting. And I guess I just never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. So this HoneyToken would be designed so that if the information were downloaded and transferred to a different system, it would contact its original server from each time it was accessed. So that would involve including code in the HoneyToken that would try and fetch some type of file or any image that's on the same system, both based on the home server, and the HoneyToken would be considered a home phone on the home server. So I found that to be pretty fascinating, and just shows like how flexible HoneyTokens are. I think that's what's really great about HoneyTokens, is that they come with flexibility, and you can really do anything you want with it to manipulate your systems, your data, and find what's going on in your system. So while doing my own work and seeing some of these like alarming statistics, I learned how flexible, like I'm saying, HoneyTokens can be. And, you know, these little nuggets of knowledge could really begin to protect an organization or even your strategic business partnerships and relationships by being dispersed over global networks when it comes to intellectual property. So if intellectual property is something you're worried about, your global networks are not off limits, especially if you have access to it, which is more likely than not. So honey, what did you gain from this? A HoneyToken is just like a honeypot. You know, you put it out there on your network and no one should interact with it. And if it does, watch your data, see what's going on. Any interaction is typically an indicator of malicious or unauthorized activity on your network. So this can be monitored, but not limited to, Splunk logs and other mechanisms that you so choose. And identification of your crown jewels can be drastically changed in your organization's vulnerability to incidents and escalations. Then HoneyTokens can aid in the process to what is most critical. So all these can work together to protect your networks and to really change your security posture of your organization. So I'm looking forward to talking to you with any questions or comments. Thanks so much for your time today.